Good evening and welcome to the Channel Studios here in London with your international news around the world in 5. US President Donald Trump has announced he and First Lady Melania Trump have tested positive for coronavirus and are now self-isolating. Mr. Trump, aged 74 and therefore in a high-risk group, wrote on Twitter, "We will get through this together." It comes after Hope Hicks, one of his closest aides, tested positive.
As all of you know, the President and the First Lady tested positive for COVID-19. They remain in good spirits. The President does have mild symptoms, and as we look to try to make sure that not only his health and safety and welfare is good, we continue to look at that for all of the American people.
Mr. Trump's announcement comes just over a month before the presidential election on the 3rd of November, where he faces Democratic challenger Joe Biden. During last Tuesday's debate, some of Mr. Trump's family members were seen not wearing masks.
I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen.
Mr. Trump has mostly spurned mask wearing and has often been pictured not socially distancing with aides or others during official engagements. The president has long tried to put the virus behind him and encourage Americans to resume normal activity, promising to deliver a vaccine soon.
We are on track to develop and distribute a vaccine before the end of the year, and maybe substantially before.
However, he has been unable to keep the pandemic off the election agenda, with cases now rising again in half of the 50 states and more than 200,000 deaths. His positive test provokes a series of questions about the conduct of the rest of the campaign. There are concerns for the health of Joe Biden, who is 77 years old, and debated Mr. Trump when he may have been carrying the virus, although the pair did not shake hands and maintained social distancing. European Union leaders have broken a diplomatic deadlock to impose sanctions on Belarus after reassuring the Republic of Cyprus that the bloc would also punish Turkey if it continued to drill in the Mediterranean.
Not made similar constructive gestures.
The deal, hammered out after hours of negotiations, will impose sanctions on about 40 officials accused of rigging August's presidential elections in Belarus. However, the country's president, Alexander Lukashenko, is not among those singled out. Cyprus had blocked action against Belarus for a month, insisting that sanctions also be imposed on Turkey, which has stepped up oil and gas exploration. Meanwhile, Amnesty International has stopped its work in India, saying the government had frozen its bank accounts in the latest action against it for speaking out about rights violations. The human rights group said it had laid off staff after facing a crackdown over the past 2 years over allegations of financial wrongdoing that it said were baseless. The group had highlighted rights violations in recent months, as well as what it said was a lack of police accountability during riots in Delhi in February. Guatemala's president has condemned a group of migrants that stormed through the country's border as violent, vowing to stop the group from crossing through the country en route to the USA. Migrants began gathering near the border at 6:30 in the morning, and by midday more than 3,000 migrants had crossed illegally, that's according to Guatemalan officials. The caravan is the biggest since the coronavirus pandemic hit Central America in March, shutting off travel as well as triggering a rise in unemployment and poverty. Hundreds of Catalonia pro-independence protesters have demonstrated in Barcelona to mark the 3rd anniversary of the region's failed declaration of independence from Spain. Protesters gathered in front of the regional government building, holding a banner reading "Not a Step Back" in Catalan, and cheering in support of independence. A small group of hooded protesters moved to Catalonia Square, where they set trash containers alight. Catalonia's 7.5 million people are split over independence, with the latest opinion poll showing 42% in favour and 50% against. And finally, Germany's largest power producer has said it's received 45 bids for one of its giant bucket wheel excavators that it put up for sale in an online auction earlier this year. The 3,500-ton Bagger 275 is the smallest of the 22-strong excavator fleet and has enough capacity to fill 24 Olympic-sized swimming pools. RWE, which is preparing for a coal-free future, is now reviewing the bids and whether potential buyers will take on the dismantling and the transportation of the huge wheel. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel Studios in Lagos.